Hello, everybody. I'm Torrin Walker. Welcome to episode 7 of the Black Male Studies session. This is a series of discussions and roundtables focused on addressing the issues affecting Black men and boys. This series is sponsored by the African American Men's Historical Society. The AMHIS is a Black American men's intellectual society focused on the preservation, history, and empowerment of Black men. Go to amhis.org to learn more and visit their Substack at amhis.substack.com. Tonight's subject is new masters. Every 2 to 4 years, the Black electorate, political parties, and candidates do what I like to call the dance. They show up in Black neighborhoods, lip service is given to Black issues, and a handful of connected people are able to benefit while the status quo in poor and working class Black neighborhoods remains the same. In a way, it feels like a slave auction in reverse, where Black gatekeepers choose who to serve and attempt to shepherd Black voters into supporting the people who they say they're going to serve. It seems that Black voter outreach is based in optics and the Black electorate is used as pawns, and even in that charade, Black men are largely left out of this process. And I wanted to discuss this issue with Professor Tommy J. Curry. Most of you know Professor Tommy J. Curry, PhD, MPH, Personal Chair of Africana Philosophy and Black Male Studies, Department of Philosophy, the University of Edinburgh School of Philosophy, Psychology, and Language Sciences, editor of Black Male Studies, a series exploring the paradoxes of racially subjugated males by Temple University Press, editor of Decolonial Philosophy and Philosophy Compass, and most of you know him as the author of The Man Not: Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood, winner of the 2018 American Book Award. Dr. Curry, how are you today?
I'm well, sir. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to have these conversations. It's really edifying for people, and people really are getting a lot of information from the Black Male Studies session. So thank you.
No, it's not a problem. It's an absolute pleasure.
All right, so let's hop right into it. The Trump administration has made deliberate and dangerously effective measures to erase Black history and limit Black civil rights gains. In an editorial published in 2019, when you announced your decision to move to Scotland, you said, and I quote, in a world where Black faculty are being intimidated into silence or censoring their work so they are not targeted, other world class institutions not influenced by donors, Republican legislatures, and alt right tactics are a possible audience and market for Black thinkers that currently reside in the U.S. What did you understand about the political climate in the U.S. and the need to look beyond the United States to enjoy more freedom, intellectually and personally?
Well, I think the United States has a very clear historical record of racial subjugation. And what we end up doing every couple of years is trying to delude ourselves into pretending that a figurehead, that a president or executive body, will usher in new freedoms for Black people. I think we saw this in this election cycle as well. Black Americans seem to have a hard time grasping that racial subjugation and white supremacy are the bedrock of American society. What we've often done is utilize moral suasion, um, political complicity, and democratic policies and platforms as a way to spread messages that lead the population to believe that the right figurehead, the right democratic figurehead, will in fact expand Black political power. Now, back in 2017 and 2019, specifically, when I made that quote, I started to understand something. I understood that there was a reality to white supremacy that no longer wanted to stay marginalized. I think what I saw was a continual growing and expansion of right wing talking points and ideology that wasn't just about a political posture, was about more, but it was more about the resocialization and reorganization of American society. Now, remember when Obama was president, you had the Tea Party, right? You had expansion of alt right talking points, and then that moved forward into right wing candidates and ideology manifesting itself, and really taking hold of locales, governments. state governments especially. Now, what I found to be interesting about that is the way that universities were attacked. It was not simply an issue of where the right wanted politicians in office. The right was aiming for something different. It wanted to control ideology. It wanted to control what people could think, what people could write. It wanted to, in many ways, reformulate what political consciousness was. And I said this back in 2019. The real issue was, how were they producing people or American citizens? I've been recently reading, the Project 2025 report. It's like 900 something pages. And what you see there is this kind of task for leadership of a conservative president. And one of the things that comes across most clearly in all those reports is the need to control what young people learn and what colleges teach. And this is really what created the backlash when I was at Texas A&M. The issue is that America is conceptualized to be a country that has evolved past leftist ideals. The way the report wants to interpret civil rights, women's rights, the notion of American civilization is really based in how they see Western or American conservative values. They want us to believe that America overcame slavery, overcame the women's rights issue, will survive past wokeism because there's a set of values that are specifically American, and these are the ideals that have to be instilled within the society. Now, the effect of that is to censor things like critical race theory. It's to censor things like Black history. And the reason that you want to censor those things is because you see them as fundamentally divisive. So what you get from the conservative element of Project 2025 is the idea that America's values, not black people, not revolutionaries, not resistance, not protests, but white American civilizational values are the key to freedom. So that means that at the college level, that means at the high school level, the primary school level, they seek to stamp out any notion of black resistance or of civil rights movement or militancy that were questioning white norms. This is a very important and powerful element that I think that black pundits haven't really paid attention to, because what America is trying to do, or what a conservative president, remember this report is written towards the conservative president or conservative leadership in the United States. What they're trying to do is depict any challenge to white norms as fundamentally un-American and threatening to the American fabric. So what I saw was the attempt for college education now to fall in line with an ideological pattern and platform. And the mistake that I think that many Black Americans made was they assumed that this was merely a political posture. This was only an effective Trump. So what we often get is this idea that there's two warring Americans, one liberal and one conservative, and that these two sides are fighting one for control. I think that's a false analogy. What we're dealing with are groups of white liberals who have traditionally enjoyed power because they've existed as the kind of pseudo elitist leaders of the American government and society versus a group of right wing ideologues who no longer want to play within the rules. See, the American political system presumed that there was a good faith effort to play within the rules, the rule of law, stare decisis, jurisprudential precedent, etc. But what happens when you get someone that breaks all the rules? What do black people appeal to at that point? And that's what I saw. I saw tenure being questioned. I saw academic freedom being questioned. I saw the very basis by which we thought about politics, meaning trying to persuade people with rational argumentation, completely disappeared. And I saw the ruling of ideology, that you can demand, you can control, you can insist that young people think a certain way, that people who disagree with you, you could fire them from their jobs. And that's what happened. So I saw immediately, look, every time this has happened in history, people have had to leave. These things don't get better, they get worse. Because what you've done is you've exposed in the system that people are now able to be controlled, that ideas become malleable, that ideology becomes more forceful than rules. And in that world, black people don't have any power. It makes us dependent on the next white master, the next white group that's going to placate to our interests. And I think that's why you see this shift now, even with people like Nicki Minaj learning to play the right wing game, becoming a spokesperson for the right. You're going over those next few years, because power has now realigned itself towards conservative values. You're going to see more and more black people trying to survive and make profit within a system where they don't have independent power through moral suasion with liberals, but they actually have to remain complicit or start serving new conservative masters.
I'm glad you spoke about that because it feels like either side of the coin, whether it's liberal or conservative, black people kind of left hung out to dry, and you basically have to play survival of the fittest with that. And you've spoken and written quite a bit about the dangers of liberalism and the political vulnerability of black Americans to white supremacist will. Like I said, one side or one half or the other. What led you to take a different approach than most academics and black pundits? Because most usually play, they just go, they blow with the wind.
Well, I think I'm fundamentally more pessimistic. I think that, going back to someone like Booker T. Washington, he understood that the racism of America, the racism of whites specifically, meant that black people had to adopt strategic postures to better themselves. I think under liberal regimes, what's happened is black people have presumed that there's this kind of moral cause, that liberals were better people, that they fundamentally were geared towards justice, even though they preserved their own power and rights. And that somehow black people were better off in that world where they at least had a dependent or codependent relationship with white liberals rather than a world where segregationists and white supremacists rule. Well, I didn't necessarily agree with that. I think that political codependency and racial subjugation under liberal ideology is just as bad in some cases as white right wing segregationists. So take this, look at this problem that we're in now. Because of the last 40 or 50 years in the post civil rights era, black people were discouraged from forming any kind of self determination. They were discouraged from economic independence. They were told, they were cultivated, socialized to believe that any aspects of nationalism or focusing on black solidarity was fundamentally bad and a remnant of a time long gone. And I believe I've said this before. I certainly know I've said it in different interviews in Europe. The strange thing about being a Black American living in the UK is that you see lots and lots of different white ethnicities, be it Polish, be it Italian, be it even British, fighting for the basis of their people, rooted in a kind of nationalism. So when you look at what's happening in the United States really is no different than any of the right wing authoritarian governments that we see rising throughout the world. So I constantly ask myself, how is it that black people are the only group of people in the world that are fundamentally discouraged from embracing any form of nationalism or group-based solidarity that seeks to better and acquire power for themselves and their group? So we tell black people that you shouldn't focus on yourself. We tell black people you shouldn't be militant, you shouldn't be nationalistic. But practically every successful European country, every successful white entity in the world has a level of ethno-nationalism that allows them thrive, survive, and compete with other countries. So how is it that black people are the only ones that are told that that's our downfall when we see time and time again that the problem that we're dealing with, the problem that black people are dealing with right now in the United States, is rooted in the fact that white people are choosing white people over every other group. I think black academics, specifically, and pundits as well, wanted to maintain their relationships with white liberals. White liberals had created a sort of social pact, if you will, that allowed them to say that we'll have a certain number of black representatives in high places, in government, as speakers, as we saw in the last election. We'll put a woman of color and say that she's black and shares the interests of black people as the presidential candidate, and that representation should be enough. But I don't. I'm Southern. I'm working class. I don't really trust elites. I don't trust the middle class very much. So what that distrust did is allow me to see that, hey, this is a facade. What we're dealing with is a system that has convinced black academics and pundits that it's okay for some of us to enjoy freedom, while others of us are censored, are kicked out of the academy altogether. So a few years ago, right? even under Biden, if you were a black thinker that was fundamentally Pan-Africanist or militant, or even dare I say a black power nationalist, it would be very, very difficult for you to find employment, right? The Western Academy, U.S. universities were not willing to hire you in many departments. Now you compare that to those to black academics that profess liberal ideology. So if you're an intersectionalist, you said that you believe fundamentally in multiracial coalitions. If you were a scholar that said, despite the evidence, mind you, that talking to white people, having moral faith in white people was the way forward, if you were someone who fundamentally said that America was great, it had great values, and we need to preserve American democracy, the academy was open to you. But if you're pessimistic, if you had a different view of how white right wing authoritarianism was growing, if you had a different view about the role that white women played in allowing Trump to win the first election and almost win the second, if you questioned any of these liberal norms, you were not welcome. So what I saw was this pretty much this double world where if you celebrated the dependency that black people had on liberal values, this notion that the society was rational and ultimately good and is trying to progress to achieve those ends, and you wanted to do nothing but reform society, you were welcome and protected by white liberals. But if you thought differently, even if you're not right wing or conservative, but you just thought differently about the relationship that you had to white liberalism and to the Biden administration, you were ostracized and censored. This spoke to me as an effect of a kind of preference and complicity in a system. It didn't allow black people to have a full range of ideas, and it didn't allow us to adopt full political postures that could actually benefit our group or possibly lead to more liberties or freedom. It meant that we were merely ancillary, meaning that we would we were used to amplify already pre-established norms that white liberals wanted to continue. And this isn't just about the academy. We saw this politically as well. You have to think that we watched almost for a decade poor working class black men be assassinated, killed in broad daylight on American streets. And instead of black people protesting with the kind of fury that would be deserving of the murder of innocent black men and boys. We saw an organization rise up to keep our anger and to keep our disdain in check. We saw symbols of people, white people in Congress kneeling, allegedly based off the respect and the murder of black men, boys, and women that achieved nothing. So we saw symbols of protest without any results. So that means that our people were conditioned to accept the death of certain members of our group as the basis for opportunities for other members. During this period of time, you had Black MacArthur winnings, you had Guggenheim Awards, you had different white liberal organizations rewarding black people that continue within this liberal trajectory. But what we fail to do, what we constantly fail to do, is ask why some members of our group have to pay a much harsher price, a much heavier toll for the success of middle class members who align themselves with white power and white power structures. So I guess I saw this. I saw this relationship between death and the advancement of certain middle class and liberal aspirant members of our society and our communities. And that was something that I rejected. And I don't think that black punditry a couple of years ago was willing to make that kind of attack on the Biden administration or kind of are the liberal benefactors of our complacency.
I want to touch on something that's been interesting to watch over the past couple of days. And this is based in the idea of identity politics over everything. Most of us who are listening to this conversation right now are pretty politically aware. And we know that for the most part, when it comes to the black electorate, the overriding message that was given to the black electorate was vote like a black woman. What that really meant, the way it was translated, was vote Democratic because the majority of black women and the majority of black men as well vote for the Democratic Party. So follow the black woman's lead. The interesting thing about that is what's happened over the past couple of years is that you've seen the rise first of the black independent woman voter. who may have decided I want to be more progressive than what the Democratic Party is giving me, so I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders, or I might vote Elizabeth Warren, or I might vote for third party independent candidates. What's interesting in the past couple of days is that you've had quote unquote, for better or for worse, icon of black women, Nicki Minaj, show up at a far right conservative convention at Turning Point USA. And I've noticed that the conversation around that, because regardless of gender, this is one of the most popular entertainers in the world. And a lot of the people who would otherwise be championing this black woman have gone radio silent. When we know that if this was a black male, if this was Drake or Kendrick or somebody, there would be think pieces by the time before she got off the stage. So, what's the difference between what's happening now and punditry and what happened about voting like a black person and using identity as a marker for integrity and a marker for what you should do?
Well, I mean that's a really interesting question. You know, when we look at the political strategy of white liberals, we see them elevate, and this goes into how they rule through representation. You see them elevate certain members of racial and ethnic groups to an almost deified status, that they're the most moral, the most advanced, the most politically aware. And that's not necessarily true. It's just that historically black women have been loyal voters to the Democratic Party because many black women have benefited from the liberal feminist policies that the Democrats advance. That's perfectly fine as a political strategy for white liberals, but it doesn't necessarily advance the interests of black people. So what you had was a Democratic Party willing to pathologize, right, black men for not voting to the same extent and having the same loyalty to the Democratic Party that black women did. And I find that to be an interesting strategy because notice what it does. It's not just that you're pitting black women against black men. It certainly does that, but that's not the only thing that it does. What it does is it conflates moral sensitivity, political acuity, and the desire for freedom with one party line. So whereas other groups have a spectrum of political ideologies, political perspectives, where people debate and weigh issues, right? Black people are told that you have to vote for party. So we don't get a discussion of economics. We don't get a discussion of mass incarceration. We don't get a discussion of poverty, etc. And I bring that back to even what Obama said, right? Under Obama, he also refused to discuss racial politics or politics that would be specifically beneficial to black people and made the claim that if you have the right class posture, the right kind of universalist political perspective, that it would disproportionately benefit black people because black people were disproportionately poor if you adopt, say, universal health care or more class-based policies. Now I find that fascinating because you see Trump's done the exact opposite. Trump came out and said, I'm for white people. He was very deliberate, right? He pushed the limits of what a president could do. He says that I come out for white men specifically and white people generally, but nobody found a problem with that. So it makes you really think about what the symbol of the presidency was. Why Obama couldn't be a black president, for instance. But I want to bracket that because I think that it directly speaks to what you're saying. You're asking, well, why have the pundits now gone silent? How is it that these black feminist icons are the people who are claimed to be black feminist icons and so transgressive under liberals become right wing symbols as well? And I think the answer is easy that we entertainers can be bought off. We can see how Nicki Minaj doesn't operate from a strong principle of resistance or sexual positivity and freedom. She's benefiting from her proximity to white power. Now, when that was liberals, she was happy to be a hypersexual symbol of whatever liberal feminist agenda was celebrating her. But under Trump, where she needs political power and favor, where she needs to have some kind of proximity and favor from the Trump administration because of personal, criminal records or history, etc., well, it becomes very easy for her to celebrate Trump, to become a black face that's going to influence other black people. And what happens to the pundits? Well, we know that the black pundits, they don't really have an argument unless you're a man for why this kind of thing happens. You see, the weakness of the liberal apparatus is that because it's so tied to identity and representation, it only has the language to pathologize its target, which are usually racialized men. So if it was a black man, oh, it's because of toxic masculinity. Same thing we saw during the election, right? We have places like Time, these other outlets running these stories where black men are turning or making an exodus to right wing ideology. It wasn't true. The voter data didn't support it, but it's the way that it pathologizes black men and black male political postures. Well, now you have a situation where a black woman is doing it. What's the language that they have? Right? They don't want to start attacking black women despite this being the case, because this is going to be the predominant symbol. This is the predominant political subject of liberal democratic policies and platforms. So it doesn't want to criticize. It doesn't have a language to nuance why Nicki Minaj is somehow just as bad as say Kanye West was back in the day. But what it means for black people is that we don't get a full rounded analysis of why people are doing what they're doing. We almost pretend that black people are magical Negroes, that they pop up in the world with the correct moral sensibility if they're women, and then if they're black men, especially if they're heterosexual black men, they have a degraded and primitive politics. And that's our fault because instead of us having a sophisticated analysis of why people are motivated based on profit, based on political proximity to white power, or just based on pure old fashioned self interest. We allow white people to dictate to us how we should perceive reality. And that's what's going on with Nicki Minaj. She is advancing, she is invested in advancing a certain kind of rhetoric of the white supremacist political platform right now, and she'll benefit from that. She'll earn money, she'll earn favor, she'll become a symbol. And what is the effect of that for black people? Well, other black people will see this, some will criticize it, others will see this as the way forward. That if we don't control politics, we might as well profit from it. But the debate is much, much bigger than that. We are now in a position where there is no longer a moral consciousness fighting against racism anymore. White liberals have shown us that instead of this intersectional coalition, our duty to fight for what's right, that they're more willing to protect their own self-interest and their jobs more so than black people's civil and human rights. So in that world, and this is one of the reasons that I think that Ice Cube actually had his head on right, even though he was severely criticized, there's a need for us to understand how we utilize, right, different parties, different platforms, different economics to support our own people. We have been misled to believe that there is a transformation of white moral consciousness that happened after the civil rights movement, that there were groups of people fundamentally invested in black humanity that would prevent what's happening right in front of our eyes today from ever happening again. We were told that hatred and white supremacy were decreasing in the society because we had a black president, because we had a civil rights movement, because we understood that we're all in this together, that we're fighting one America against the other, liberals versus conservatives. And all that turned out to be a lie. So once we've done that, what then is our message for black people now? It can't continue to be silence. It can't simply be Kimberly Crenshaw's AAFP paper that said that Trump is mobilizing misogyny. That's a moral claim. That doesn't matter anymore. He could be a misogynist. He could be a rapist. He could be a criminal. He could be a thug. These are all things that Trump actually is. The problem was that we didn't have the kind of imagination that allowed us to understand that it was possible for white people in America to rule through violence, dishonesty, ideology, and coercion. So now that black people are exposed to this reality, how are our politics? How is our commentary? Is our journalism going to change? Historically, we've written articles, we've created periodicals to cover the injustices of America, the lynching, the castration, segregation, and murder of black people. But now we have a punditry that presumes that this should not occupy the central space of the United States or the black imagination in America. Who are our pundits talking about the increase of lynchings? Who are our pundits talking about the violations of democracy? What is our international audience trying to shame America? Who are we trying to form partnerships without the United States being the locus or the sole strategy of our liberation? Why are we not traveling around the world to talk about, to build allies against the power structure of the United States? Because those were strategies in the 60s and 70s, not the strategies of the 21st century. So we are being misled to believe that our future still lies with finding the right or a new white master instead of developing black independence and internationalism.
All right. I want to move on to the next part of the conversation because you led into it with the last question. You've spoken a lot, and we've spoken about this, about black men being sort of the canaries in the political coal mine. Um,
Mhm.
you said that like the oppression of black men and specifically the death of black men, the murder of black men, was the beginning of the end for black civil rights in the United States. And apparently, this seems to be an increasingly accurate prediction. Given what you said and written about, what do you see as the end goal of Trump's and the white supremacist political program?
I think the end goal of Trump's political program is an America where like black liberation and even leftism, right, does not hold sway in the core of America's political culture any longer. What I've been most disturbed about in Project 2025 is not what is suggested, but really the comprehensiveness of its ability to rule the political landscape. It anticipates that conservative leadership has a duty to stamp out any other paradigm or political challenge to a system. This means that people, and here's the most dangerous part. It means that the conservative leadership of today is trying to create a world where black people and even leftists and liberals do not have sympathetic ears in the future. I remember in one of the interviews I gave when I left, I said one of the most dangerous aspects of the Trump administration has been its ability to fill the Supreme Court with its judges, with judges that are going to be loyal to conservative wing politics or conservative right wing politics and Trump. And the reason that that's dangerous isn't just because of the precedents that it will set, but because of how challenges to conservative ideology will be shot down and the society will be reformulated over the next 10, 20, or 30 years to accept white supremacy as a moderate political platform. This is what Trump wants to do. Most people become liberals through college education. So if you take away the ability of American universities to create liberal-minded individuals, to uh, people who are not inclined to pursue democratic policies or platforms, people who value their white racial identity instead of issues of poverty, privilege, etc., that liberals tend to focus on, then you have effectively destroyed the audience for both Black progress or peaceful, incremental Black progress in this country, as well as leftism. This is what Trump's ultimate goal is trying to do. He wants to create a world where everyone who is trying to challenge white supremacy becomes an enemy of the country, an enemy of white people. And this is going to be a very, very effective strategy because what we've done is we still are making the mistake of believing that this is a 4-year problem. I've heard numerous people talk about the ways in which Trump's policies are isolated to Trump. And that is a grave, grave mistake. What Trump is doing is changing state governments. He's allowing the Supreme Court to create precedent that will continue to oppress and nullify any attempts for black people to gain rights, the rights that he's taken away. He's eliminated our ability to get those back. And he's nullified the political posture of white liberals such that they can't reproduce themselves in American universities. So we are looking at a situation where America's public, its institutions, and its major decision makers are going to be fundamentally conservative and right wing. They're going to be hostile to black presence, hostile to the history of black rights. So you got to think about this. We are now going to be raising black people in a world where the gains of the civil rights movement no longer exist. What is going to be the triumphant story that black people are going to tell future generations, their children, about a world where they had rights, depended on white liberals, and then lost the very rights that black people fought and died for in this country? You see, this situation that we find ourselves in mirrors exactly how black people are treated throughout Europe and even in some countries in Africa. We are experiencing political repression and terror. Every day I read new periodicals and stories from Atlanta Black Star about racial harassment and violence increasing. We are seeing a world that is being reformulated, terraformed, if you will, to have a geography of horror and terror towards Black Americans. And the basis for that, this is the most troubling part. The basis for this is based in practically nothing but the desire and political will of white people to now create a world in their image, where they no longer have to share resources or airtime or platforms with white liberals. So they've identified black people as well as immigrants and white liberals as a threat to the foundation of this country. In that world, black people are going to have to reorganize. In that world, the end goal is white supremacy and the dictates of a white population over everyone else. And as much as we want to believe that white liberals will come back and save us, you have to think white liberals ultimately benefit from this world too. So the white liberals that are willing to speak to black people in a post-Trump era are going to be white people and white liberals who have an incredible amount of power, not in the sense of their political ideology, but in the sense of them having a white identity. So they now get to mediate their political posture, not on the basis of its principles, but on the basis of the fact that they're the only ones that get to actively participate in the political process. So now white liberals can even talk about being proud to be white and how that whiteness needs to coexist next to some version of a black identity that respects the power of whiteness, that respects what white people have done for this country. Right? It's the whole political spectrum is shifted. And I don't think that's not a conversation that we're having with black pundits. Black pundits are still flaming gender wars. They're still talking about your conscious leads, your grits and eggs. They're trying to talk about the political posture, attitude, and temperaments within the black community. They're not giving us an understanding of economics. People talk about capitalism being exploitative, but they don't talk about what people are willing to do to escape poverty. People are not talking about what happens in black communities that are being isolated and locked out of the job market. You can have a theoretical notion of capitalism, but if you don't understand poverty and how people are supposed to survive to get their basic needs met, to have food, to have shelter, to have water, then you don't really understand the ways in which people are going to change the way they think of themselves and other people to make sure that they're able to eat, or to make sure that they have housing, or to make sure that they have jobs. What kind of pressures is that going to put on black communities and families? What are black people going to be willing to do just to survive? Right? We can talk idealistically about revolution. We could talk about resistance. We could talk about intersectional coalitions with liberals. What if the cost is too great? What if too many black people have to die? Is that going to still let people have the same kind of fervor and affinity for coalitions with white people that they know will abandon them at the first sign of trouble or violence? Right? See, these are things that we should be having forums on. We should be discussing. We should be talking to one another about. But we're still playing under these same liberal molds where attacking each other within our group is more productive than attacking the people oppressing us who are outside of our group. And that's going to forever be a recipe of disaster.
Want to do a little bit of house cleaning. This is the Black Male Studies Sessions, Episode 7, New Masters. This series is sponsored by the African American Men's Historical Society. The AMHIS is a Black American men's intellectual society focused on the preservation, history, and empowerment of Black men. Go to amhis.org to learn more and visit their Substack at amhis.substack.com. If there's time while the conversation is going on, we're going to do a brief Q&A towards the end of the conversation. So if you have a question for Dr. Curry while we have him here, put your hand up now so I can get to you about it when it's time for the Q&A. Moving on to the point that you made earlier, Dr. Curry, for the past few years, Black men have been portrayed as a separate, hostile demographic, separate from Black women and Black LGBTQ voters.
Hmm.
In 2020 and in 2024, we had what I coined the Blame Black Men campaign. It was when you saw celebrities, political pundits, and paid and unpaid shills attacking Black male voters who wanted their concerns addressed, even though Black voters, as I said earlier, pretty much vote as a block, not by gender lines. We vote as Black people as a block.
Hmm.
Why was there so much resistance to addressing Black male voters' concerns respectfully and rationally, as opposed to the way everybody else's concerns were?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it's twofold. Because black men have been structurally isolated from American society, there is an unwillingness to address their concerns because it risks destabilizing certain platforms. For example, if you think about black men being over policed, hyper incarcerated, that reality that many black men experience in racial profiling with the criminal justice system does not allow us to believe that American society is just and fair. Black men constantly expose the contradiction and the incoherence of an American society that is allegedly free and democratic, with one that is still racist and fundamentally tyrannical and repressive. So I think putting black men or listening to black men's demands as well as their perspectives within liberal Democratic Party lines is untenable in that way. The second reason I think there was this extreme hostility to black men is because some of the demands were too great and superseded liberal politics. And here's what I mean by that. Liberals primarily operate by a focus on sexual minorities and women's interests. So issues of, say, white women getting jobs, or the claim that sexism is just as bad as racism in American society, become kind of the ideological currency of the party. And one of the reasons that it does so well among white college educated and black college educated voters, when working class black men make demands, those demands don't necessarily appeal to the same interests as the college educated, because black men are talking about employment discrimination by groups of whites who are largely liberal, in charge, in power, and who are women in many cases. It wants to expose the way that violence happens even under liberal regimes. Remember, when you have police killings, when you had BLM initially start, this is under an Obama administration. White liberals and even the talks that Obama seems to consistently give black men do not like to admit that the structures, the architecture of the white liberal platform is really corrupt and broken, because it wants to pretend that all racial animus and evil comes from the right. And black men is a stark reminder that there's plenty of racism and repression under the liberal left. So I think what happens with black men is because it's so easily for them to be criminalized and dismissed politically, right? We know that there's various studies that talk about American politicians being the least likely to respond to their group politically. Uh, they can't be mobilized simply to serve the will of the Democratic Party lines. Now, you of course have certain pundits who are educated, who are middle class, if not rich, that serve that function, but working class black men represent the contradiction that I think that white liberals don't want yet to admit. And because they can't be mobilized or brought in line with a lot of party politics, they have to be attacked. So you have to uplift a different group, which is specifically men, black women, to represent your political party and to represent what loyalty to that party looks like.
You've been critical of intersectionality and the concept and the practice of intersectionality and other post civil rights ideas. What does the end of civil rights legislation and the rise of white supremacy in America mean for Black Americans going forward?
It means that black people are in a land with lots of enemies and very few friends. Uh, intersectionality is interesting to me because as we mentioned before, in a previous session, it depends on multiracial coalitions with groups of whites who we believe will serve our interest and protect our causes. Uh, it is a political posture that promotes and moralizes dependency, the dependency that black people have on white power. In a world where that no longer exists, right? We do not when white liberals don't have power, we don't have power. And one of the biggest criticisms I've had politically of intersectionality is not simply that it gets the political programs of America incorrect, but it destroyed the ability for us to have any alternative. See, what's happening right now is really exposing the fact that black people didn't think that white liberal rule would end. We imagined a world politically where white liberals would always be in power. And this cuts across institutions, our politicians, our academics, our commentators, all believed that under white liberals, even though the world was unjust, even though white women benefited the most from white liberal policies, that was our best bet. And we would be safe. At least some of us would be safe in that world. Well, what turned out to be the case? It turns out that we're not safe. It turns out that black people now don't have allies that can get agendas or their self-interest passed. So two things this in my best guess, these are the two things that are going to happen. There's going to be a withdrawal of black people from politics, meaning that we're going to start mediating our relationship to political postures based on what other white groups can do for us. And there's going to be uh, kind of a deference to white moderates who may be right wing, but are willing to offer something, crumbs to the black community. For the next few years, I think this is what we're going to see a realignment towards. In the future, however, I think that there are future generations of black people, and this happens with every group in every country at every period of time. There will be resistance. There'll have to be another civil rights movement, and when that time comes, some of it will be extremely violent, but it will be enough to destabilize white interests to the point where people believe that it's better for us to give some concessions than not. But again, it puts us in a position where black people are fighting for rights they had in the 20th century, yet again in the 21st century.
On March 10th and 12th, 1972, the National Black Political Convention was held in Gary, Indiana. 10,000 Black American political activists from across the political spectrum. Some were socialists, some were in the Black Panther Party, some were Republicans, some were Democrats, some were nationalists, gathered to discuss and advocate for Black communities. What came out of that convention was a resolution stating that the American political system was failing Black Americans, and that the only way to address the problem of the system failing Black Americans was to transition to independent, local, state, and federal Black politics. In 2025, Black politics has become synonymous with party loyalty. So, my question to you is, how did we get from the politics and the awareness of 1972 to what we have now in 2025?
Well, 72 is a different time, right? 72 comes off the back of Jim Crow segregationism, long fought battles for black racial opportunity and representation in society. In the 21st century, we're not just dealing with how we understand black people in relationship to the white majority, but many of us, unfortunately, believe that we're trying to fight for groups of black people within the black community. So, whereas in 72, the power structure was illuminated. We're fighting against segregation. We're fighting against histories of racism that are the afterlife of slavery. In 2025, we're fighting against white supremacy and groups of black people within the black community that we no longer trust. So this is why you have black men fighting against black women fighting against black men, black LGBTQA groups fighting against the black heterosexual community. Our overlying political posture now is liberal feminism, not black radicalism. So I think that the material conditions, the change in how the world sees Black people at large, will push more militancy, cohesion, and solidarity. I think that's an inevitable product because groups respond to their realities. But we have to understand how deeply fractionalized we are. We have different sects of blackness now that have been historically competing for white recognition. This is a completely different battle than what we had in the 1970s, where the dominant issues of Black oppression were segregation and poverty. So it had a class element, which is why Marxism and unionism were so powerful and impactful. And of course, white supremacy that made sure that we understood that Blackness was a stain upon our ability to exercise our rights in the United States. So changing what blackness meant, changing how blackness operated politically, was of the foremost concern. I don't think that the present generation we have now understands that. So what black people will have to do is again change how we think to address the actual material and political conditions in front of us.
All right, Dr. Curry. Thank you for that. I want to open up the floor for a brief Q&A. Do you have a few minutes to answer some questions?
Of course.
All right. All right. So now's the time. If anybody has questions for Dr. Curry, put your hand up so I can see you, and I'll try to get to as many people as possible. The only thing I ask is if you have a question, come up with a question. Do not come up here to get on a soapbox. If you have a question for Dr. Curry, now that we have him here, ask a question, and then we'll move on to the next person. So we're going to start first with Randy Toure, Pedagogy in Black. How you doing, brother?
What's going? Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear. You had the floor.
Appreciate that. Appreciate you for having me. Dr. Kerr, you mentioned earlier when you were speaking, you mentioned how with this new admin and Trump, how he's not willing to play within a certain sphere of created rules. He's not playing with the rules, and that made me think about and you tied this back to the civil rights movement, and it made me in part think about how one crucial piece that I think many people have missed, especially as it pertains to the civil rights movement, is the fact that independence movements also emerged around the same time. Like they share the same cognitive political universe. And my question is surrounding this idea of this there's almost this mechanism that forces our politics into this like multiracial coalitions uh, that stymie the development and growth of like black nationalist structures. And I'm wondering if part of that is because we no longer look to the third world and the development of movements and connecting our movements with theirs. Because part of what you get around the same time of the civil rights movement coming off the back of the 40s, where America sort of emerges as this soft power, um, is this idea that America now wants to play a leadership role because it wants to diffuse communism being influential in the third world. And so at the same time, you have this hypocrisy in the states, of course, because the United States, is still having assaults in America, discrimination and all of that. But they sort of on the public world stage, they want to play into this idea that they're leaders, and so because of that, they want to, you know, uh, play this political leadership role. And I wonder if part of the reason why today we don't see um that with Trump, or if I can ask it this way, if this administration is no longer willing to play by the rules, how much more will we need to develop a connection with the third world and these, Pan-African uh organizations in order to sort of like survive this wave that's happening now?
Well, I think that's a great question, but I think this is all in the realm of possibility and alternatives, right? One of the big pieces of Brown v. Board 1 and 2 was, of course, according to people like Du Bois, Derek Bell, and later the historian Dudziak, was to win the Cold War. That you need to show that the society was democratic so that black people would not turn to communism and Marxist ideas and align itself with anti-colonial struggles, that's happening in Africa, the Caribbean, etc. I think that Black people certainly need to have an internationalist perspective to think about African independence in relationship to what they're doing now in the United States. But we have to remember that times have changed, right? It's not just that it's not a cut and paste option that the solution is going to become the same thing that happened before. Because notice how the world's changed. Whereas there were major revolts and anti-colonial movements that were casting Europe out of Africa, and there was real resistance from Cuba and other places in the world. Right now, we have almost total domination of the global South by the metropole. So think about it. What's happening right now in the United States is also happening in Canada. It's happening in the EU. It's happening in the UK. So black people have to reorganize what they think liberation looks like and what they think they can achieve in the global north. Trump's not playing by the rules because he is organizing various white nationalists to dominate Western spheres of influence. So think about the relationship that Trump has to someone like Nigel Farage and the Reform Party here in the UK. These relationships are being drawn. They're intellectually feeding each other because they anticipate a world where they can now engineer white supremacy without apology. So yes, there's a need for us to speak to Africa. It's a need for us to talk to the rest of the global South. But we have to recognize that these are not neutral parties, that many of the white nations that have become associated with Western democracy are fundamentally hostile and are going to be increasingly xenophobic and unwelcoming, not only of black people throughout the world or the Commonwealth, but black people within their shores. So you're getting both a domestic launch of aggression as well as the prevention of people from entering these countries. Unless black people are talking about mass relocation back to Africa, I'm not sure that the same approach is going to yield the same benefits.
All right, let's go to Duke CT, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So Duke CT, the microphone is yours. You have the floor. Duke, going once, going twice. You got it? Duke.
Yes. Hello. Hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, sir. What's your question for Dr. Curry?
I have a quick question. Is that do you with the the rise of the with Mandani and all those other like Democrats who are going through more of those socially socialist type of leanings and such? Do you think that will have more black people go over there? Like be more of that type of resistance because I think maybe just me. I think that AOC is going to be the next president because of this type of the backlash of Trump overreaching. Do you see that happening or no?
I think it's very possible, right? Again, we don't, no one has a crystal ball, but here's what I would say is that I think that if there is a backlash to Trump and you do get this kind of anti-establishment socialist, kind of ideology being pushed, there's a question of how those candidates, let's assume the best case scenario that they win, how do those candidates translate policy in still a largely Republican Congress and certainly conservative Republican state governments and Supreme Courts? You see, what I think, this is what I'm saying. I think is the worry. Even if you change the figurehead of the executive branch, you do not have alignment between Congress, the Supreme Court, and state governments because of the rules of federalism that allow their initiatives to be taken up in a way that brings us back to the gains we had pre-Trump. So even if those people become president, how do we undo what Trump's doing under his term? How do we start to trust a white American majority, right, to be Democratic partners where they've already said under the last two Trump administrations that they're perfectly fine with white supremacy and segregation, right? I think that's the danger. Sure, if you're asking if I think black people support those candidates, absolutely. I think they'll support them in mass in relationship to Trump, given what we're going through. Do I think those candidates are going to be politically effective? I honestly don't. I don't think they're going to be politically effective given the world that we live in now, even if they win the next election cycle.
All right, let's go to Ian. Ian, you have the microphone. What's your question for Dr. Curry?
Hey, how you doing? This is Ian. It's an honor to be on stage with
You're breaking up,
Professor.
brother. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're going in and out a little bit, but yeah, we got you right now. What's your question for Dr. Curry? Welcome.
My question is this: do you think it's a real failure of um leftist or I guess black
Hey, Doc,
political
can you hear him?
strategy?
Yes, I can hear him.
Ian, we may have to drop you and come back in a little bit. We're gonna.
He said he could hear me. He said he could hear
No,
me.
you're kind of breaking up, so we may have to drop you for a second. Come back, get your till you
Hold on.
get your thing together. Let's go over to drop down and come back, and we'll try to bring you in. Let's go to Ricky, and then we'll move on to our next Q&A question. So, Ricky, you have the microphone. Ricky, the floor is yours. What is your question for Dr. Curry? Keep going through it. Ricky, are you there?
Hey, what's up, Torin? What's up, Dr. Curry? Great discussion. So my question is this. You talked about the symbolism without results, right? If we go back to 2020, everybody was out in the streets marching. And what did we end up with? We had the Safer Communities Act and more cops. Even right now, I feel like we can't really effectively fight against Trump because he's killed 100 Venezuelans, and then he goes over here and he has his national police force. But people are talking about what he said and scandals and pageantry, symbols, not real issues. To what extent do you think us focusing on symbols is an impediment to progress? Because we never get results. It's never about the results.
Listen, that's a great question. You know, I tend to defer to the work of Derek Bell on this. He was a great friend and mentor. But he made the same argument. He said, look, black people are willing to concede revolt and revolution for symbols that don't change our reality or material conditions. And this is something that I've written about time and time again, that we are willing to believe that a black face in a high place is just as good as the uplift and the material change of our whole group when it's not. Trump is utilizing all forms of his executive power to rule over municipalities, to control different geographies, and to intimidate the population into compliance. If you criticize him, he wants to challenge the venue and their press rights. If you upset him or disagree with him, he's willing to censor and silence you. It is a fundamentally different point in time where the presidency is not being made to obey, much less follow, the rules of law or the Constitution, which means that since he's playing outside of the rules, that is basically a little more than a gentleman's agreement at this point. And this is one of the things that he's exposed. Black people are perpetually and constantly disadvantaging themselves by not looking at actions instead of symbols. The question that we have to ask ourselves is why is it that our rights remain contingent, able to be taken away at a whim, right? When the wrong white party gets in power. We have to start focusing on the reality of where we are, why the military is being disproportionately used in black cities like New Orleans, Baltimore, and Chicago, and what that means for any ability for us to effectively protest, resist, or organize with our group. I think looking at symbols is going to be a continued recipe for failure.
All right, and the last question of the night is going to Dr. Tony Gaskew. Dr. Gaskew, welcome to the space. Thank you for listening. You have the floor, brother.
Fantastic. Hey, Tommy, how you doing this evening?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
Fantastic. As you know, Tommy, during the Black Power movement, Jamil Abdullah Alameen, when he wrote Die Nigger Die, a political autobiography, he said, every black birth in America is political. With each and every new birth comes a potential challenge to our existing order, and that each generation brings, an untested militancy. With that, the Black Liberation Army, in their message to the Black movement, I believe a political statement for the Black underground stated that America must learn that Black people are not the eternal sufferers, the universal prisoners, the only ones who can feel pain. That is, revolutionary violence is therefore not a tactic, but a strategy, and that it forces those responsible for our oppression to realize that they too can bleed, that they too can feel our pain. Now, we understand over the last 60 years or so, the counterinsurgency playbook of guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, and pacification has not only killed Black revolutionaries, but killed really the Black revolutionary spirit. So here's my question. Do you believe there's enough left in Black consciousness for the rise of a second armed Black underground?
That's a good question. Do you mean right now, or do I think it will develop over the next few decades?
Over the next few decades.
Yes. Over the next few decades, yes. If we're talking about now, no. And the reason for this is that look, we both study anti-colonial movement, right? Times change, messages change, right? The failures and the attacks that young people will have of the generations before them will change. Um, so if this political program that Trump has ignited continues over the next decade or two, I absolutely believe you will see the rise of revolutionary mindsets, of revolutionary consciousness, and of a will to politically destabilize both the state and society more broadly. But this is what I mean, though, right? As we both know, to get there requires a ground zero, so to speak, in horror and tyranny. People's mindsets change because the political ideas and the pacification strategies are overwhelmed by the violence that Black people are enduring and continue to suffer. So that's why I said what we lost in the 20th century can be refound in the 21st century, but it comes at tremendous cost and death. Um, and I think that's just the historical movement of people. This is why in any society, we saw this especially like in, North African countries, throughout the mid and late 20th century, right? You will have educated elites not be able to answer for the suffering of people in the lower classes, and you will see people rise up against it. And we've seen this all throughout Europe, especially France. I think Black people play by those same rules, but I am hesitant to think of what that reality means for us, given that it will take such tremendous cost and loss of life for us to organize and jettison some of these thoughts of reformism and pacification that embraces nonviolence.
All right, I think that's where we'll put a pin in it tonight. Thanks you once again, Dr. Tommy J. Curry, for taking time out of your schedule with the time change to be able to have these conversations. Thanks to
Well,
everybody.
thank you.
No, my pleasure, brother. Thanks to everybody who came through to listen. This should be up. The replay will probably be up within the next hour, and I'll put this out so everybody can check it out. It'll also be up on other platforms no later than this Friday, give or take between the break and everything. So I just want to take time again. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for listening to episode 7 of the Black Male Studies sessions, New Masters. I hope you got some information tonight. I hope it was edifying for everybody. And again, I want to thank you all for coming out. Thanks to everybody who came through with some excellent questions for the Q&A. Sorry for the people who weren't able to get on, but we didn't have time to get everybody on who wanted to do one. But we'll do another one coming up real soon before the end of the year. We're working out the subject now. We'll have that out for you soon. Again, y'all have a good night. My name is Torrin Walker. Thank you for listening to the Black Male Study Sessions. Y'all be safe. And Dr. Curry, you be safe and have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.